everyone, and welcome to the 36th episode in our AI and You podcast series. Today is Friday, January 22nd, 2021, and I'm your host, Vikar Saidi. I'm a computer scientist and engineer, a lecturer, and a consultant. I'm also the author of several books. My most recent book is about artificial intelligence and is titled The Genome Affair. The Genome Affair is a speculative work. It examines what the world might be like if some of the more extraordinary capabilities forecast to be realized in AI over the next 20 to 30 years were actually realized today. Given the growing list of frightening existential threats humankind now faces, the book pays particular attention to the impact AI is expected to have on world affairs. The book is available in ebook format for those who prefer to read on a digital device, but it's also available in a high-quality paperback edition. The Genome Affair is available on Amazon, so I hope you'll take the time to read it and to leave a review. Amazon book reviews are very helpful for writers. I'm very interested in how science and technology influence world affairs and the big questions facing humankind. Studying at the confluence of the great disciplines of human history, political science and thought, international affairs, science and technology offers a deep understanding and pedagogically important lessons of how advances in human endeavor have influenced and impacted civilization. I'm available to give talks on artificial intelligence and its related technologies, and on the impact AI is expected to have, or is already having, on our world. If you'd like to get in touch with me to arrange a web-based event or consulting meeting with your company or organization, you can find my contact info in the podcast notes below. Please make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and share it with others if you find the content valuable. Thank you. And now, on to today's podcast. In our last podcast, episode 35, I spoke about the risks associated with artificial superintelligence and whether we'll be able to control it. In today's podcast, episode 36, I'll talk about the dangers lurking in America's political future if we are unable to manage some of the forces that can destabilize the country. Inauguration Day in America felt very hopeful, but the demons that have terrorized us these past 4 years are unfortunately still with us. We must deal with them if we are to prevent an even worse outcome in the future. These forces include those unleashed by the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Forces such as artificial intelligence, biotech, computing, and data science. Let's get started. It's the dawn of a new era in America. At least 81.2 million people, the cohort within the electorate that voted for President Biden, can breathe a sign of relief. There will be tears of joy as the fear and terror that spread throughout the land from coast to coast has now dissipated. A regime whose cruel and reprehensible words and actions often stood in such stark contrast to those enshrined in America's Constitution has, following considerable acrimony and violence, stood down. The acceptable norms established over generations in both culture, government, and society have been reasserted by our new president and reinforced in poetry, prose, and song by every person who shared the president's podium on Inauguration Day. The darkness and evil that came to characterize the term of our 45th president an erratic and despotic leader who managed to win the election in this great nation, despite all predictions to the contrary, have been replaced by a kinder, gentler, more compassionate face of America that so many of us have so desperately missed during these past 4 years. But we must not forget, not even for an instant, that the 45th administration was actually a symptom of a much more serious and deep-rooted problem that our political class, Democrats and Republicans, along with our industrial and financial elites, have steadily been nourishing during the past 3 decades. During the Cold War, which often turned quite hot when we consider America's engagements with Soviet proxies in Cuba, Korea, and Vietnam, the country had a vested interest in ensuring that our middle and working classes were well looked after. America and its allies in the West were engaged in a daily ideological struggle with the communists in the Soviet Union, and the non-aligned nations of the world were watching with great trepidation to see which ideology would emerge as superior. Would it be the central planned economy administered by an authoritarian state in the Soviet Union? Would Russia, a country whose people had no rights or freedoms, a people who could not turn to the rule of law to protect them from those in power, triumph? Or would it be the free market capitalist economies and democratic societies of the West, countries with separation of powers between the various branches of government, between cities and towns, counties and states, and ultimately the federal government? Would societies that enshrined freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in their constitutions prevail, or would victory rest with authoritarianism and the cult of personality? The Cold War was an extraordinarily challenging time as the Soviet Union surpassed the West with their formidable prowess in science and technology. Over and again, they demonstrated scientific and technological leadership in the 1950s by putting satellites in orbit, followed by the first man, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin. But Soviet success was short-lived, as America, propelled by President Kennedy's challenge to the nation in the early 1960s, organized 400,000 people and 12,000 companies behind the goal of putting a man on the moon and safely returning him home before the end of the decade. It was an achievement that came to embody the idea of American exceptionalism. In the 1970s, during a visit to London, a Soviet minister asked whether he might meet the UK's minister in charge of distributing bread to the country. Confused, his British hosts insisted they had no such ministerial position. They explained that it was simply the free market that determined where and how much bread to bake and place on shelves. The Soviet minister was deeply perplexed. In his country, for the proletariat, they had long lines virtually every day, not only for bread, but for virtually every other household staple. During the same period, America's middle and working classes enjoyed a standard of living that had become the envy of the world. They had ample food, shelter, clothing, healthcare, education, labor unions to protect workers' rights, a social safety net, and plentiful conveniences of the modern age. In this environment, the gulf between the prosperity of citizens residing in the Eastern Bloc versus those in the West grew until the Soviet Empire was no longer economically viable. Following the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the unraveling of the Soviet Union In bloodless chaos in 1991, America and the West stood alone in the world with an economic model and an ideology of governance previously unmatched in human history. The Stanford scholar Francis Fukuyama called it the end of history. Before long, though, with the advent of globalization, financial and industrial elites in America were signing manufacturing and trade deals across the globe without consideration for any factor other than corporate profitability and the wealth of institutional shareholders. This commercial culture that has come to define the business practices during the past 30 years, an environment in which industrial, financial, and political elites negotiate economic arrangements that consider only their interests while abandoning the needs or considering the impacts on the lives and well-being of tens of millions of Americans, has led us to where we stand today in 2021. The stark economic realities of America's working class that have come to characterize the era of our 45th president bear striking resemblance to the realities that were the genesis of the Socialist Workers' Party that evolved into the Nazi Party in Munich, Germany in the early 20th century. The Nazi Party took root in the wake of World War I, beginning in 1918, but struggled to gain much traction since American banks were willing to underwrite German industry and thus enable stable employment throughout the country. German society took no interest in this band of Nazi brown shirt thugs and their eccentric ideology. But following the U.S. stock market crash in October 1929, American banks called in their loans on German businesses, and this triggered a wave of bankruptcies across the country and subsequently soaring unemployment. 30% of German workers were left without jobs. A party who in 1928, despite 10 years of organized effort, could muster only 2.5% of the national vote and barely a dozen seats in the 500-seat National Assembly, the Reichstag, saw a dramatic turn of fortune as German society turned on the liberal left, then the majority party in power. By 1930, the Nazi Party had finally begun to accumulate power, and by 1932, they had become a national force to be reckoned with. It was precisely the suffering of the proletariat in Germany that brought the Nazis into power, quite literally overnight. Scholars who have studied this history extensively, Anne Applebaum of Johns Hopkins and Cynthia Miller-Idris of American University, insist these are not unlike the circumstances we are experiencing in the United States following 30 years of unchecked globalization. If we do not consider the factors that brought our 45th president into power on behalf of a disaffected working class cohort that today represents nearly 71% of his base, we will be dealing with them again very soon. It is imperative for the Biden administration and both parties to recognize these undercurrents. They are not surprising. But if we are unwilling to recognize and then work together to address the roots of working class and in the 21st century, middle class discontent and hopelessness, the feelings of abandonment as Fourth Industrial Revolution attributes, including artificial intelligence and robotics, biotech, computing, and data science, continue to displace countless jobs. It is a virtual certainty that proletariat sentiments that led to the rise of our 45th president will revisit us again. But next time, we are likely to be in for for a considerably more dangerous and perhaps even an existential calamity. Next time, things have a real possibility to get far, far worse before they can get better. We only need to reflect upon World War II for a glimpse of how bad things can be. This time, though, with the state of advancement in science and technology, with lethal autonomous weapons systems enabled by AI and robotics, the outcome may be worse than we care to imagine. Thank you for spending some time with me. I'm trying to follow the TED Talk format, and so I'm keeping these podcasts under 20 minutes. Let me know what you think. I hope you'll find these insights into artificial intelligence helpful, and I hope you'll read my new book, The Genome Affair. It's on Amazon. Until next time then, this has been the AI and You podcast with author Vikhar Saidi.